All right, good evening. My name's Ken Schmidt. I'm the Director of Development Services for the Town of Addison. On behalf of town leadership, I'd like to welcome you to the second community open house for the Sam's Club Special Area Study. So we do have a busy agenda before us here tonight, but before we get started, I want to briefly touch on why this project is important for the future of this area and ultimately the town. So in Addison, we're fortunate to live and work in a community that is economically thriving. Addison is situated in a region and a state that's perhaps seen more economic growth than any other place in the country. So with that, Addison's prosperity has certainly been influenced by its location, but also I want to highlight and point out the work of past and current leadership that has occurred over time. We've been fortunate to have leadership that has stressed the importance of long-range planning projects like this, but then has also funded services, public infrastructure, and social amenities such as parks, trails, and our special events that really contribute to making Addison such a special place. The study area that we're looking at tonight is a bit unique for Addison in that it's in a stage in its life cycle where it's experiencing both varying degrees of success and decline. You can see that decline with some of the businesses that have left that area and also with some of the private infrastructure where it's degraded, and then also in the form of the Midway Road project, a road that is being reconstructed. When you have dynamics like that in a thriving community like Addison, it frequently creates dynamics where there's opportunity for reinvestment. People look at areas like this and they see opportunity for change. That change occurs in the form of new infrastructure, new private development, new amenities. Like the past in Addison, current leadership takes great effort to get out in front of that change, to proactively plan through long-range planning efforts such as this, to influence that change, ensuring that it's compatible with our existing neighborhoods, of which there are many around this study area, and then also the existing businesses. So the purpose of this plan really is to ensure that it's a plan that is ultimately serving as a guide and marketing plan for this area for people that are interested in investing in the area, but also ensuring that it's based on and formed by community input through events like this, and also accounts for the perspective of the market and also looking at the physical constraints of the land as well as the public infrastructure that serves this area. So we've been very fortunate here on the project team to have been served by a very engaged and active advisory committee comprised of residents of this area and also business property owners. So before we get started, I want to be sure to thank our advisory committee. They've had very spirited discussions, they're very passionate about this project, and they're very interested in seeing the best possible outcome for this area. Also want to thank our council members that are in attendance as well as our planning and zoning commissioners. Thank you once again for joining us tonight. We very much look forward to receiving your feedback. And now I'm going to turn it over to our consultant project manager, Karen Walls, to lead us through the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ken. It's great to see everybody here tonight. I know there are a few more chairs up in front if some of you in the back would like to be seated, but if you want to stand, that's great too. I'm delighted to see all of you. We've got a lot to share with you tonight, so we're going to try to cover that ground pretty efficiently, but we also want to make sure there's plenty of time to hear from you in a number of different ways. So that's really what tonight's about, is getting your feedback on the work we've been doing over the last several months. The agenda we have, as you can see on the screen here, we're going to provide you a brief overview of the project. Ken has already explained some of why we're doing this study at all, but we'll give you a little more of that background and the research that went on. Part of a study like this involves analysis and technical assessment, so we're going to share a little of that with you. We also have had quite a bit of public involvement already, and we want to share a little of that that so you get the sense of it. Then we're going to move into talking about the proposals that have been developed over the last several months. And we're going to try to go through those and ask for your feedback as we go along. And I know there's a lot of material, but we're going to try to cover it hopefully clearly. And then talk also about branding and identity. Where you see number 6 there that says discussion at the stations, that's all those areas in the back of the room. Some of you, I know, looked at those boards already. When we break from the presentation part, there will be somebody at each station so that you can talk further and get more information and get your questions answered and give us more feedback. So we're using several different approaches. We appreciate you sharing your time this evening, and so we're going to get right into it right now. So let me give you just a little bit of a project overview. Ken already sort of introduced that this is a project of the town of Addison. I'm Karen Walls. I'm the project manager and the lead of the consultant team. And with me on the team is Kimley Horn. And we have a couple of Kimley Horn folks here tonight, and Mark Bowers. And let's see, I don't know whether Daniel or Katie, I think you'll meet them at the stations. And then as Ken mentioned, we've had a very important and active advisory committee. These are the folks who the council appointed on the advisory committee, and I know many of you are here. If I could just ask you to raise your hand if you're an advisory committee member so folks can see. All of you have been critical to the shaping of the ideas we'll be sharing this evening. As Ken mentioned, the study area here, which you can see on the diagram, it's on the north, the boundary is Beltline Road. On the east, it's Midway. On the south, it's Hornet Road. And on the west, it's kind of the back property boundaries of the set of neighborhoods along there. Somebody asked me earlier, where is the Sam's Club going to go? So just to make sure everybody's clear, there's not going to be a new Sam's Club. But this used to be the place where the Sam's Club was, and so that's what people sort of think of this area as, and that's why it's called that. We hope that by the time we finish, we won't be talking about Sam's Club anymore. But you can see that study area on the map here, and here's a quick look at the scope of the project. First was the strategic assessment, that research that I mentioned before, and including the community input. The second phase is where we're at now, on coming up with development concepts, ideas to guide the future of this area. Phase 3, the final plan, will come after this evening's meeting, because we will take your ideas into account as we put together that final plan. We expect that to go to the Planning Commission, Planning and Zoning, and then to City Council later on this year. Part of this project has been a great deal of community engagement that's really important to the town. On the screen, you can see the number of different things that we've done so far. I'm not going to go through all of the details of this. I'm going to share a few highlights, but I want to, and I'll show you in a minute where you can find all the details on the town website. But we've had, as you know, the advisory committee has been meeting. They'll have one more meeting to sift through the comments from this evening. This is the second of 2 open house sessions like this. We held another one earlier in June. We also are doing 2 online surveys, one of those in June. The other one will open tomorrow. You'll be getting an email about it with the town newsletter and an email to you directly. And that's going to be open until October 7th. It will be asking a lot of the same questions that we're asking you tonight, but it gives people another option. So if you have more thoughts, or if you have friends who couldn't come tonight, you can point them to that online survey that we'll be having. So that's just a little quick background about the study and about who we are. Now we want to ask for a little background about who you are. And so this is where those keypads come in. Does everybody have a keypad? If you do not have a keypad, raise your hand and we'll get one to you. Okay, we've got one in the back there, a couple in the back. Mary, can you, got one there? Anybody still need one? Okay, so the reason that we use the keypad polling is one aspect of the input that we'll hear from all of you this evening. What it does is it helps us to quickly get feedback from all of you all at once on some questions so that we can really get a sense of the group. And that's really valuable to us. It's usually interesting to the folks who are here because then you can find out, you know, do most of the people here share your ideas, or maybe they have different ideas? It gives you a little perspective on the rest of the community as well. You will see the results up on the screen really quickly. We'll put together a whole report after the fact, so we're not going to talk about them a lot tonight, but you'll get a sense pretty quickly about how people are thinking and what their sense is of these recommendations. So the first question I'm going to ask you is a practice question, and this is a little bit difficult in a way. Those letters up at the top, O blank T blank B blank R blank E blank T, the letters that are down below there fit in there to spell a word. So think about that a little bit, which group of letters that might be, and then push the button on the keypad according to what you think the answer is. And we'll give you a few minutes to sort this through. It's a practice, obviously. It's not going to make a difference to things, but take a look and see what you think there. Have people had a chance to think about what that answer might be? Okay. All right, let's take a look and see. Okay, so we picked this word given Addison's weekend last weekend. This word is Oktoberfest, and so you can see that most of you did get 63% got that right, and so that's great for the first question. Before I give you one more practice question, I want to just make a couple of other points. One is when you're pressing on the button, press down pretty firmly so that you can see, so that it will connect. Secondly, if you see up in the corner, there's a little red rectangle up there. If you can see that? Wait till that turns green for the new question. Otherwise, it won't be picking up your answer. And thirdly, whatever answer you put in, that's it. There are no do-overs. Okay, so let's try another practice question. And this is an analogy. So a pancake is to a griddle as a hamburger is to what? Okay, everybody have a thought about that one? Okay, so 80% thought that was the grill. I'm not sure about who thought that you were going to cook the hamburger on the bun, but sometimes people just check these to see what's going to happen. So those are the only practice questions. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now so we get an idea of who all is in the room here. The first one is, what is your main involvement in this study area? You might have several reasons, but pick the main reason why you came tonight, why you care about this study area. You might be a property or business owner, an employee who works in this area. I'm sorry. Okay, okay. Let me read them for you. I'm not sure we can do anything with the lighting, but let me check on. We'll have somebody check on that. Okay. So let me then read them for you. The first choice, number 1, a property or business owner. Number 2, an employee who works in the area. Number 3, a customer of area businesses. Number 4, a resident of the area. That is, if you live like in Addison Grove, you live inside the study area itself. Number 5, if you're a resident of one of the neighborhoods nearby the area, that would be number 5 that you would pick in that case. Number 6, an Addison resident that lives further away from the area. And number 7, you're interested for some other reason besides what we've talked about. If your reason for being here is something else, then you would pick number 7. Well, is your house in the study area? Okay, so then in your case, pick whichever one you think is the more relevant, but you've got to just pick one choice. Okay, anybody else still thinking about that one? Okay, so it looks like 51% of the folks who are here tonight are residents of nearby neighborhoods, and the others are from the area or from property and business owners. The second question, how long have you lived in Addison? And so let me read these again, and I'm sorry, when we checked this earlier, it seemed to be working, the background. So choice 1, if you've lived in Addison for less than 1 year. Choice 2, if you've lived in Addison from 1 to 5 years. Choice 3 is if you've lived here 5 to 10 years. Choice 4, if you've lived here 10 to 20 years. Choice 5, if you've lived here longer than 20 years. And choice 6, if you don't live in Addison. Okay, so we've got quite a range of folks, with many of you having lived here longer than 20 years, so you've got a great perspective on the history and success of this town. Last question here, I showed you that study area before, the Beltline and Midway. When did you last visit a restaurant, a store, or a business in that study area? So choice 1 is today. You went to someplace there today. Choice 2, you went to a business or a store this week. Choice 3, if you went there this month. Choice 4, sometime earlier this year. Choice 5, if you're not sure, but it was before COVID, that would be choice 5. Or choice 6, if you don't remember the last time you went to a business in this study area. No, the question is asking about, is the Green Hill School is not in this study area. Okay, so most of you use these businesses pretty often, it looks like from the survey here. So that gives us some background. Hold on to those keypads. We're going to be asking questions as we go along during the presentation. So the next section we want to touch on is the project background. And there's a couple of quick facts. The material that you're going to see on the screen here is also at the station. So if you want to find out more or talk more about it, you'll have an opportunity to do that later on. But the study area, as you can see, is 79 acres. There's about 74% of it that's commercial, about 12% is residential right now. In terms of community input, I told you we had several other efforts early in the process to understand people's interests. We did an online survey that was available in May, and we got a lot of response, almost 200 respondents, most of whom lived in this area. We also held an open house in June, on June 10th. We had about the same size of crowd as we do tonight, actually, and those people also were mostly from areas around here. On the bottom of the chart, and it's probably hard to see this, so we'll get that to you afterwards, all of the detailed reports of all the ideas we heard at those two things are on the city's website, so you can go back and check on all of those. The online survey results, we got lots and lots of ideas. I'm not going to try to read through all of these, and I don't expect that you're going to be able to read all of that print from a distance, but we got a lot of comments about the best possible future for this area. A number of people were concerned about multifamily development and apartments. We heard that quite a bit. There were also a lot of people who wanted to see a good mix of residential and businesses and retail. There were people who said things like bring in fun, excitement, and activity. So a whole range of ideas that we heard from folks during the survey. We also asked them about the issues of connection, being able to walk or bike to get back and forth between open spaces and businesses and residences. And people agreed that that was really important for whatever new kind of development might happen in this area. We also, at the open house in June, we asked, one of the questions was, here's what I want to experience when I come to this area in 2030. A couple of those suggestions, well, this is the list of suggestions, actually. Several people wanted to see open or outdoor space that is safe and secure. Okay, is that better, I hope? Okay, all right. Thanks. It's a little challenging in this setting, but hopefully we'll get it to work. Okay, so other things people said they wanted to experience, dynamic community, not senior living, easy connections to the Cotton Belt station, small green places to gather, multi-generational housing, live jazz. Those are just a few of the ideas that your friends and neighbors and some of you shared with us back in June. We also asked people what is important to make this a place people want to live, want to work, and want to visit. And again, I know that you probably can't read through all of these, but these are the ones that had a majority of the folks at the meeting thinking that they were important. Things like reducing auto traffic congestion, enhancing or expanding the parks, open spaces, and trails, including small grocery stores or specialty food markets. Those were some of the ideas that got a lot of interest in the meeting, the open house that we had in June. We've mentioned the advisory committee a couple of times, and they have been meeting. They've had 3 meetings now, and they've taken all this information into account, as well as the more technical background. And what you see here is just a sketch from the first meeting where they were looking at how do we fit some of these ideas together. And so you can see things like a green edge between the existing neighborhoods in this study area. And you can see a circle up there at the corner at Beltline and Midway, saying something special should be here. So they've been working on a lot of the things. What you see tonight is much refined from this, but this is the kind of ideas that they've been taking care of and thinking about. There's also a little of the background technical information we want to share with you as well, and I'm going to ask Mark Bowers to cover that.
Thank you, Karen. In order to come up with a future vision, it's going to depend obviously on all of you in the room as well as your neighbors and others to tell us the types of things you'd like to see in the area, which Karen has been emphasizing. But it also takes a look at some of the existing conditions, and some of those things might create opportunities for the types of things that folks envision, but some of those things may also create barriers. So I'm going to give you a high-level overview of the types of things we looked at and some of the takeaways. So to start off with, we looked at existing land use and existing zoning. The map on the left is the land use. That's telling us what is on the ground today. So the yellow colors are typically residential. The lighter the yellow, it would be less dense single family. When you see the red colors, those tend to be commercial areas, and those areas that have the red and white stripes going through them are vacant properties within the area. So those were some of the key things that we looked at from a land use standpoint. You can see the area within the study area itself is primarily commercial types of uses, but we've also added a layer there of some of the underutilized properties. So they have more than a 50% vacancy currently, and some of the businesses that have failed recently. And then the one on the right, just to touch on it, that pinkish lavender color represents the zoning being a planned development. What planned development means is that it doesn't fit into retail or residential. There was a specific plan that was created for each of those sites. The buildings were built to that plan, and so that is the zoning that's in place, is the buildings that are there, and nothing else. So essentially what that's telling us is if there is a change in the type of development in the future, there will probably have to be rezoning as a part of that. Karen? So a couple of other things. Property disposition. So the image on the left is looking at the number of parcel owners in the area. Each color is a different owner. So it's not a huge number of owners to be able to work with, to be able to look at the opportunities for the area. So there is potential for change. The one on the right is looking at the size of parcels. So the darker the parcels, the larger they are. So when you see the large parcels in single ownership, those are opportunities that if there were some change in those areas, it could have a more significant impact. A couple of other things we looked at, mobility from a couple of standpoints. We looked at Midway Road, we look at the thoroughfares in the area. Major arterials are the darkest, so that would be Midway Road. But then you see Proton is a residential collector, so if you can imagine both of those streets and the difference in them, that starts to add into the type of roads they are. The key thing we've done is we've also added where the traffic signals are, because that's a key thing along Midway Road, to be able to make left turns out of the surrounding areas onto Midway. And then we have also identified where median crossings are, and I will say that what we're showing here is the plan for future Midway. So as it's being reconstructed, this is where those median openings and traffic signals will be. The one on the right is looking at trail connections, either existing or the Future Trails Master Plan that was recently adopted by Council. So some of the demographic, Karen touched on a little bit of this with the high-level overview, but we looked at the town of Addison versus the Metroplex. So wherever you see the green colors, that is indicating the data related to the town, and you can see how that relates to the entire Metroplex. First, we're talking about the population. So you can see the growth rate for Addison since 2010 is over 42% compared to the Metroplex, which is about 23%. You can see the percent of owner households, it's 18% in Addison. We heard quite a bit about wanting to see more ownership product in the city. And you can see the average household size at 1.79. And again, you can compare that to the Metroplex as a whole. Additionally, we looked at the population trends. So the population in 2020 was estimated at 17,800. As I said, that's a 42.5% increase since 2010. Significant growth in the area. That just says there's a lot of people that want to live here with you. Forecasted growth is 24.5 or almost 25%. That would be about 4,400 additional residents over the next decade. We looked at housing units by type. In this case, we looked at the Metroplex on the top and Addison on the bottom. So for the Metroplex, you see it's predominantly single-family detached. That's 63.3%. Whereas in Addison, it's 12.3%. On the flip side, you see multifamily for the Metroplex at 30.4%, and in Addison, 79.3%. So there's a distinct character, there's a distinct ownership pattern here, as well as type of units that people live in. Again, we heard a lot of feedback about that throughout this process in the first public meeting, as well as from the committee. Single-family housing market assessment. Since we did have so much discussion about single-family, the community has expressed a great interest in supporting single-family development within the study area. So we did an analysis of 2 typical single-family projects. So what we did is we took a parcel that, based upon the value of that parcel, and said, the average parcel within the study area, and said if it was to redevelop as single-family, what would the price point be on those homes? So we said if the homes were 6,000 square foot lots, which is similar to some of the surrounding areas, the price would be $1.2 to $1.25 million per house. If the homes were on 3,500 square foot lots, so if you made smaller lots and could get more density of houses in there, but they're still single-family detached, we found that the price point would be around $900,000 to $950,000. So if a developer proposed single-family housing within this area, it could be consistent with the vision that we're showing you. We're not saying that single-family is not desired in the area. We've heard clearly that it's desired. But what we're suggesting is if a developer proposes it, that's an acceptable type of development that the community certainly wants to see. But our feeling is that the market may not be able to support single-family detached, but we would probably see a mix of housing, including townhomes, apartments that could be ownership or rental within the area. So a few takeaways about the for sale versus the rental are on the screen. I guess what I'll say is the for sale inventories are at an all-time low. So really we're seeing a lot of demand for sale ownership project. Median sales in the Metroplex have been increasing significantly, so you may be closing the gap to be able to reach some of those price points we were showing, but there's still quite a way to go. And the single-family detached units will be most viable as a component of a larger development. What we mean by that is we're thinking that there can certainly be single-family components, but what we're showing on some of the plans that we've been discussing with the committee is a mix of housing types so that there are multiple choices so that you can get some single-family in there, but there may be some higher density housing to start to set that off on the price points. Employment overview now. So again, Town of Addison in the green, Metroplex below. And this is where another distinction for Addison. You're a major employment center. It's no secret to any of you. There are a lot of people coming into the Addison as a daytime population that are coming here to work and then going home to other communities. So we see 50,200 full-time jobs in Addison, 3,446 businesses. You can see the high level of education in the community. So it's really a solid background to continue as an employment hub. And then we looked at the employment forecast going forward, 2020 to 2030, and we see that employment in Addison is forecasted to increase by about 22%. So just like your residential is forecasted to increase, we also believe your employment will increase over the next 10 years to 62,000 jobs. So 10-year demand for housing, retail, and office. Just trying to whittle that down to what will the town of Addison support. We're estimating about 2,550 additional residential units, about 277,000 square feet of retail, and over 1 million square feet, 1,090,000 square feet of office. So there's certainly some demand there. That's town-wide. There are some other sites like the area around Addison Circle that will pull in some of that demand, but we certainly think that this area could get its share of demand. And then this is just a summary of some of the development opportunities, talking about the for sale housing. Products would be cottage types of housing, townhouse. We talk about missing middle, which is in a lot of communities you have single family homes on 6,000, 7 to 10,000 acre lots. Or not acre, square foot, excuse me. That would really be big. And then on the other end, you have apartments. But there's nothing in between. And there's a lot of folks that say, you know, I want to downsize, but I don't want to go to an apartment. Or I want a place when I get out of college where I can live, but I don't want to be in an apartment. I want to own a townhouse. That's what we mean when we talk about missing middle. Retail or rental housing, we're looking at things from market rate multifamily, active adult multifamily, and senior care, so the wide spectrum of housing. Neighborhoods serving retail, we're looking at inline retailers and destination service and office. And then finally, office, mid to long term for service office, flexible workspaces, and medical office. That's a little bit in alignment with our thinking related to some of the senior housing. If you can do some things that are connecting the medical office and the healthcare to the senior housing, that could be a big win as well.
So based on that analysis and the input that we heard from the community, the advisory committee and the consultant team worked together to come up with a proposed framework. And that's what we've been focused on since June, is the recommendations or the preliminary ideas that we want your feedback on this evening. The first thing I want to tell you is that the strategic direction of a study, what is the point of that? The purpose is, this is really the foundation for what the development would be in the future in this area. This is not a change in the zoning, but this sets out the policies and the priorities that the town would use to review any individual proposal that would come along. So it's a very important foundation for the future of this area. And so as we worked with the advisory committee, we came up with a set of objectives. These are the things we think this area's future development should achieve. And so on this little triangle, you can see that's the most general statement. We're going to talk about those first. Then we're going to talk about the design principles and the physical development framework. So we're going to try to cover all these. They get more and more specific as they go along. By the way, I will note that we'll be posting this presentation on the website, so you don't feel like you need to write down all the ideas that you're going to be seeing. So here's the list of the preliminary overall objectives. Again, these are the things that we think the development of the future of this area ought to achieve to have the best future for the study area and for Addison. There are 7 questions here, 7 ideas, and I'm going to go through these one at a time and ask you what your thought is about how important each one of these is to the best future. Again, think about this. The best possible future for this area is probably not what's there today with those things that are declining. So think about what the best future for the area is. How important is this objective to that best future? So the first objective, strengthen the area as a distinctive place within the Addison community. Can you all see well enough now? Okay, so the first, choose number 1 if you think it's very important. Number 2, somewhat important. Number 3, somewhat unimportant. Number 4, very unimportant. Or number 5, I'm not sure. And I'm not sure is a great answer if you're undecided about these questions. But we'd like to get your feedback based on what you've heard so far. Okay, so most of you think that is an important objective for the area. Here's the second objective. Support new development with uses, character, and buffering that continues the desirability of the surrounding neighborhoods. In other words, that the development here is a kind of character and is buffered from the neighborhoods so that existing neighborhoods are still desirable neighborhoods. And it supports and continues that. The answer choices are the same throughout this set of questions. So number 1, very important. Number 2, somewhat important. Number 3, somewhat unimportant. Number 4, very unimportant. Or number 5, I'm not sure. Okay, I'd say that was a very important objective for us to achieve in the plan for the area. The third objective would be to include usable public green space throughout the study area. As development happens, we want to see usable public open spaces throughout the new developments or the redevelopments. Are folks still thinking about that one? Okay, again, most of you view that as being an important objective. The next objective, provide opportunities for uses, development patterns, and pedestrian connections that supplement the options available in Addison. What that means is that the development in this area would add uses and developments that add to or supplement what you can already find in Addison and maybe give you some new options that you can't find in Addison today. Okay. The next one is include development options that are feasible under anticipated current and future market conditions. In other words, this plan should be one that is realistic from the standpoint of what the market, what a private owner would look at and be able to do here. Okay. And enable development to occur in phases over time with usable open space in each phase. Mark showed you that map that shows there are a number of different property owners in the area. So this objective says that our plan should be possible to do a piece at a time and still be successful. Okay. And the last thing is build in flexibility to adapt to changing market demands and circumstances. We all know how much things are different now than they were 2 years ago. How important is it that this plan has some flexibility so the town and the property owners can adjust as things change? Okay. The next part of our presentation talks about the physical development framework, and this is the handout that you have, and you're going to also see all of these things on the boards. I'm going to ask Mark to go through this section with you, and then we'll ask your feedback on these place types.
Thanks again, Karen. So now we're digging down a little bit deeper into those guiding principles that we had. We started to lay that out and put some form to that in the form of a preliminary plan moving forward, that physical development framework. So a couple of the tools that we use to do that, the development concept uses place types. So a lot of people are familiar with land uses. So there may be a single-family land use, a multifamily, a retail land use. Place types, we typically look at a range of things that might work together to create a great neighborhood. So what we suggest is that they can be arranged. It gives a little bit more flexibility on how they can occur. So it's not a single land use. It describes the character of the place. It gives a little bit more flexibility for the project to respond to the market, but it also gives the town some teeth to be able to say, no, that's not really within the vision of what we're looking for. So the proposed place types that we're going to go through here are listed here, and I think we'll just jump right into them. So each of these that I go through will be structured the same way. They all have a character and an intent. They provide land use considerations, so we tell you what the primary land use is envisioned to be, but there may be secondary uses that support that land use. And then some of the assumptions that we had related to building density, to the height of buildings, is listed at the bottom. So the first one we have is active residential, which is at a lower scale. That's the name of the place type. And it's a living area that supports a variety of different housing types, primarily single family, and a compact network of complete walkable streets that are easy to navigate by car, bike, or foot. Small lot, single family attached and detached, townhomes, row houses, cottages, those are the primary land uses. And then you can see that all of these, for the most part, could have civic, institutional, parks, and open space supporting. We're thinking densities of 7 to 14 units per acre and a height of 2 to 3 stories, depending on how adjacent it is to existing residential homes. So these are some images of some of those types of buildings, ranging from the cottage housing to the row housing that's envisioned in that place type, the active residential lower scale. Now the next set of place types is active residential higher scale. Again, it would support a variety of housing. It can include fourplexes, apartments, condominiums, buildings approximately 3 to 4 stories. And it would provide higher density to support the restaurants and other amenities in the area. Okay, and then this is a range of the images that are envisioned to support that place type. The next is senior-oriented development, and we're looking at a range of things that support older adults from active living areas to continuum of care ranging from memory and nursing care, assisted living, and again you see the indicators and assumptions at the bottom. And again, some examples of those types of developments. The bottom right is not that type of development today, but one of the ideas we have is, can you reuse some of the existing office buildings to support the medical needs, medical office needs of a development like that, or even redevelop interiors of that building for nursing care. Restaurants and retail, again, the character and intent is primarily retail and local serving commercial uses for the local area, the local residents. And then these are the types of typically a standalone building based on the sizes of some of those properties where they occur. And then the next one is a mix of uses. So it's typically a ability to live, shop, and work in one place. It could have retail, commercial, apartment, condominium, live, work, office, either within proximity or within the same buildings. And these are some of the examples of those types of buildings. And then, this is for Karen for the place types.
And so as Mark is describing the kinds of places that we imagine for the future of the study area. And so I'm going to ask you at this point, how appropriate do you think that that place type is to fit somewhere within the study area? As we continue on, we'll talk about where these things go, but at this point, let me ask you how appropriate you would think that these are to the best possible future, again, for this area and for the town. So the lower scale active residential is the first place type that Mark described. So how appropriate do you think that place type is for a location somewhere within the study area? And again, number 1 would be very appropriate. Number 2, somewhat appropriate. Number 3, somewhat inappropriate. Number 4, very inappropriate. Or number 5, I'm not sure. Okay, so that one looks pretty appropriate. The next place type was creating active residential communities at a higher scale. Again, this is the picture Mark showed you. How appropriate is that somewhere in this study area? And again, 1, very appropriate, 2, somewhat appropriate, 3, somewhat inappropriate, 4, very inappropriate, 5, I'm not sure. Okay, the range of opinions on that one. The senior-oriented development, Mark shared that idea of a range of places with assistance and perhaps with medical services as part of that place as well. How appropriate is that place type somewhere in the study area? Okay. Restaurants and retail. Again, these are mainly intended or thought to be local serving, not major regional draws. How appropriate is restaurant and retail, that place type, somewhere within the study area? Okay. And finally, a mix of uses. So a place that's got a mix of uses in a building like you see here that provides living and working opportunities in the same place. How appropriate is that mix of uses place type somewhere in the study area? Okay, great. And one of the things I mentioned before, we want to have some flexibility for future development, especially along Midway Road, where we would think about that mix of uses being the most appropriate thing in most of those areas. Do you think that that's an appropriate kind of flexibility for new or redevelopment along Midway Road frontage itself? Okay, great. One of the other points that we made in the earlier part of the discussion was the idea that there should be some kind of a destination at that corner of Beltline and Midway. And so you see here some examples of what might be a destination that would draw people and create a real identity in that corner. So something like a specialty grocery store, public art, places for outside dining and so forth. Another thing that we've included in the framework here is the idea that within the open spaces there should be some particular kinds of destinations, whether that's a particular playing field or a plaza where you could gather, that there's things in addition to the trails that would be part of the open space inside the study area as it redevelops. So I want to ask a couple of ideas here about what kinds of things do you think would be appropriate destinations at that corner of Midway Road and Beltline? What would be an appropriate kind of major destination? One of the ideas we've heard is like a small grocery store or a specialty food shop. How appropriate do you think that is as a kind of an identity destination at the corner there? What about some kind of a new building with really distinctive architecture, a building that itself would be sort of a identifiable location? Is that a good idea for a destination at the intersection? What about enhancing Nate's Seafood and the surrounding area as a major destination? We've heard what a draw that place already is. What about enhancing that and the area around it as a destination for the future? What about public art at the corner, at the intersection there? Okay. What about a plaza or some kind of outdoor gathering space? What about some kind of a destination restaurant, a chef, a famous chef's restaurant or something like that? Okay. One of the other issues that we're focused on here is housing diversity. And the future development in this area should support the town's housing policy and try to achieve those objectives. And part of that has to do with providing more diverse housing options, broadening the range of things that are available in the town of Addison. So we've told you about those place types and the kinds of housing that could be a part of the place types. As you think about those general descriptions at this point, based on what we've talked about so far, what you know now, how effective do you think this will be in providing housing? I'm going to ask you about some particular groups of people who we hear are people we want to attract or keep in Addison. So how appealing do these place types, how appealing are they in providing housing for current Addison residents who want to stay here but want to downsize? Do you think that those place types will be effective? Will they be very effective? Number one, somewhat effective, somewhat ineffective, very ineffective, or 5, I'm not sure if they'll be effective at providing options for Addison residents who want to downsize. The concern that we've heard most often in the past is people who live in a single-family home with a yard in Addison and want to stay in Addison but don't want to take care of that kind of a house as they get older. That's the kind of person we're talking about here. This project right now is not talking about a specific development proposal. This is the plan to create the boundaries and the framework for the town to evaluate whatever proposals come in the future. So there's not a specific development proposal that we're looking at this evening. No. Well, we're showing a range of housing. We specifically explained about the inclusion of single family, and I think that to the question, Mark showed you a range of heights in different locations. There are different things that would be appropriate in different areas. That does include single family, that does include apartments, it includes a range of other things. And in any case, this is, again, a plan to guide the future. It is not a specific development proposal that's been made to the town. Okay, so this might be somewhat effective in creating some options for those Addison residents who want to downsize. How effective at providing housing choices for young adults that are just now beginning their careers? Do the place types we've talked about create options, housing options for them in this study area? What about people who work in Addison's offices and restaurants? What about seniors who need some kind of assistance in daily life? Does this create new options for them in Addison? What about for young families? Does it create options for them? Or expand the options for them? What about for single people of all ages? We've gone through 2 levels of the concept so far, the overall objectives, which are broad statements, and then these more specific things about the places to create. The next section we want to talk about are more specific policies on design, form, and character. As we go through these in the presentation, we're going to just try to summarize those. You'll be able to look at them at the stations in the back as well. So at this point, we want to try to give you those highlights and get your initial feedback on them, and then we'll get more discussion at the stations.
Yes, so again, these are going to be utilized. They're going to be just as important as any diagram that's created, any framework that's created for the town staff to be able to evaluate proposals, to be able to say, is it meeting these policies? So the first is connected trails and open spaces. Again, I won't go through every one of these because they're at the stations and you can provide more feedback there. But the intent is that the open spaces are created throughout the development, that there's a trail system, that there would be new open spaces throughout. They need to be accessible to new residents and business patrons. They need to be accessible to existing residents in the community. No new connections would be made between existing residential in these open spaces. The connections you have at the streets would be the ones that would be there. We heard that clearly from the committee. The primary open space with trail would be located along the western edge and would act as a buffer between any new development and the existing neighborhoods on the west side. And open space destinations will be dispersed geographically throughout the area. This is the overall framework plan for that. Again, you'll be able to see it better at the stations, but if you can see the red pointer here, this edge right here is the buffer, minimum 50-foot buffer before any development starts, and that would be utilized as the piece to connect the existing dog park, the existing trails within the area.
So thinking about the general ideas and based on, obviously on what Mark has shared with you so far, how appropriate is it that the development provides new open spaces that have both active and passive activities, the open spaces in the new developments here? Okay. How appropriate is it that we have a primary open space along the western side of the study area with new trails and have that open space be a buffer between new development and the existing neighborhoods? How appropriate is that there are walkable and bikeable connections within the developments in this study area? So as new development happens, that they connect to one another so people can walk and bike between the new developments. How appropriate is it that the walking and biking connections from existing neighborhoods are only on the existing routes? No new connections between the neighborhoods and the future developments and the future open spaces? Yeah, so the idea, Mark was showing you earlier on the map that there are trails that exist now. And so if you live in a neighborhood that exists today, you would take those existing trails and go up, say, around on Beltway or something to get to the dog park as you might do today. But there wouldn't be new connections between your neighborhood and whatever that development would happen on the other side of the buffer. Okay, the next set of policies are about building height transitions. Mark?
Yeah, so as we look at this, we think it's very important that that edge to the existing single-family neighborhoods be developed in a very sensitive way. So we talked about the buffer. So what we're saying is the areas bordering existing neighborhoods will require heights that respect the existing neighborhoods. We don't want a lot of tall buildings next to those neighborhoods. Green buffers would be a minimum of 50 feet from the existing neighborhoods and would transition to a maximum of 1 story for every 50 feet beyond. So you would have to go a further distance from the neighborhood before you could add additional. So for every 50 feet, you would be able to add another story, up to a maximum of 4 stories within the area. And that is all within the requirements of the town's or proposed neighborhood transition zones. And then the diagram at the bottom is showing the existing single-family neighborhood on the left with the backyard and fence, and then the 50-foot buffer with walking trail, and then the townhomes on the right-hand side of that image. Sure. So that we understand that there are a range of opinions tonight related to the building types. We're here to get feedback on the building types. Right here, we want to talk about heights of buildings in relation to the existing neighborhoods, but we'll have additional opportunities at the stations as well to take more of those comments related to the appropriateness of the building types.
So thinking of what Mark is showing of what we're suggesting here about how the building heights transition as you move further from the existing neighborhood, how appropriate do you think those policies are for the best future in this area? So how appropriate is it for this idea of a green buffer of at least 50 feet width from the existing neighborhoods? Is that something that you think is an appropriate kind of a policy for the town to be looking at in terms of what would be on the, what would be behind the fences of the existing neighborhoods? Is it appropriate that we look at a green buffer of at least 50 feet or perhaps more, but at least 50 feet from those neighborhoods? And then the second idea that Mark was explaining is the idea of height transitions that are based on how far beyond the buffer that a building is, so that the further away from the existing neighborhoods you could go up with more stories, up to a maximum of 4 stories on the far side on the midway frontage. The next area focuses especially on neighborhood compatibility.
Yeah, so the neighborhood compatibility, we're looking at the types of things that would be happening on the borders. So future development, redevelopment areas bordering the neighborhoods will require site, building, and landscape treatments that respect the adjacent neighborhoods. Residential and neighborhood compatible commercial uses would be required along the open space adjacent to the residential neighborhoods, and open space buffers will be required between new development and redevelopment areas. So again, it's trying to make sure that whatever develops on that site is compatible as well.
Okay, so the design policies that Mark was just describing are intended to make sure that the development right next to neighborhoods is compatible with those existing neighborhoods. So I'm going to ask you about several of the different neighborhoods that are in the surrounding area now, and so I want to show you that map first. You can see at the top the Addison Grove community, just below that with the blue outline Town Lake. The larger area to the west is the Midway Meadows, and the Addison Timbers is part within that. Then you can see Waterford Park, and then down at the bottom in green, the townhomes of Addison. So on these next several questions, I'm going to ask you, how compatible do you think these ideas would be with the character of those neighborhoods? So how do you think these compatibility policies will be in terms of making sure the development is compatible with Town Lake? How effective compared to that Town Lake townhome development? How do you think this will support compatibility with the Addison Timbers, Midway Meadows neighborhoods? How about the compatibility for the residents at the townhomes of Addison on the southern part of the study area? And what about for residents of Addison Grove? Okay. So the last section of policies is about mobility and connection.
So we heard a lot from the committee related to mobility and connection. So one of the key things that we want, or a few key things we want to point out, is access to the existing sites along Midway Road will follow the Midway Road reconstruction plans. We're not proposing additional access points other than what are in that plan. As parcels develop along Midway, consolidation of driveways to Midway could be allowed if those property owners desire doing that. No new vehicle connections will be allowed between Addison Grove and the parcels fronting Midway. So no new connections in that area to Addison Grove. No new vehicular connections will be allowed between Addison Grove and Beltway. We're not proposing any changes to Addison Grove in that area either. Vehicular connectivity between the parcels south of Beltway will be required. However, the block patterns will be designed to limit cut-through traffic. We don't want a single road that becomes a major thoroughfare through that area. We want people to be discouraged from cutting through, but be able to still access between the parcels. And then roads throughout the new development areas will be designed as walkable, pedestrian-friendly streets that provide traffic calming, encourage slow vehicular traffic.
So, Mark, you want to point out any of the items on the diagram?
Yes. So again, this is Addison Grove. If you can see the red dot, the pointer. So new development, there's no new connections between Addison Grove and the parcels on Midway or to Beltway. You can start to see that block pattern to where the streets curve. You have to jog around certain parcels to be able to move through, but you still have connectivity at those major circulation points along Midway Road. We are proposing, we think it may be aspirational, but it's at least worth a discussion for a connection to Hornet Drive on the south. That is a private street that's owned by Greenhill, but it's something that we think could be explored to get additional people to that traffic signal.
So in terms of the policies on mobility, how appropriate is it that there are no new vehicular connections between Addison Grove and the parcels on Midway? How appropriate is it that we have no new vehicular connections between Addison Grove and Beltway? Okay. All right. How appropriate that the connections south of Beltway are designed so they discourage cut-through traffic, as Mark was saying, so they jog back and forth so it's not a major thoroughfare. And then the idea that new vehicular routes, so this is inside this new study area, should be pedestrian and bike friendly. How appropriate is that? Okay. So you put all of those things together and you have the diagram that was in your handout, and Mark, you can just highlight that very quickly.
So again, the overall diagram is looking at the strategic design principles. It's to create a network of connected trails and open spaces, vehicular connections where they benefit, building heights and uses that respect existing development, maximizing the flexibility for buildings fronting on Midway Road and creating a destination at Midway and Beltline. So this diagram really starts to highlight those green belts that we were showing, the green connections along the edge, the green buffers. It starts to highlight that vehicular connectivity and the white lines and how the vehicular circulation would be broken up. That starts to create smaller parcels and block patterns. Here we start to apply the building types. So the lowest density, active residential lower scale would front all of these edges through here against the existing neighborhoods. These would be mix of uses throughout the areas closer to Midway. Again, mix of uses through this area. And then showing the active residential high scale in this deeper parcel where there's a little bit more depth to transition. And then this entire area on the south, we think based upon the size of the parcels in that area, could really support that continuum of care, senior-oriented development with perhaps even some sort of a medical office associated with it. And then we add a couple of additional things based upon some of our previous discussions, the destinations, with the major destination being part of the idea at Beltline and Midway, and then some of those green space destinations that we showed you images of what they could potentially be in these key areas.
So now that we've kind of put all the pieces together, tell us how appropriate you think that this preliminary framework, how appropriate is this to guide the future development in the study area? How appropriate is this framework as we've shown it to you so far for Addison and the area's best possible future? Okay, great. So I'm going to go really quickly through this illustrative plan section because this is just an example. We try to include something that shows that we look at to see whether or not the uses are feasible, just as far as how much space you need for driveways and so forth. This is not a particular development that's been proposed, and it's not something that would be a requirement. It's just an example. So what we tried to do is take that framework and look at how the block structure could develop and look at how the buildings might lay out. Again, this is not a proposal. This is not a specific proposal that's been made so far, but just to look and see whether or not it would actually work in the area. And so our conclusion is that these concepts, these place types could be created in the space that's available with the parcels within this study area. So we wanted to share that with you as well. The last item I have to ask you about is branding and identity. And I want to come back to what I said earlier, that someone was asking, you know, we're talking about the Sam's Club study area. It must be that we're going to have a Sam's Club here. No, we're not, and that is not the name that we want to think of for the future of this area. So we want to get some ideas about what brand or what identity might be appropriate. And so here are some options that have been suggested so far. What might be the new name for this study area to kind of get people aware of something that's different, that's happening, that's exciting here. So here's some possibilities: Midway Landing, South Midway, Reading District, recognizing your former mayor and the dog park, the Laylock Center, Addison Gateway, Midway Commons. I'm going to ask you for your kind of first cut response to that of what would be your top pick, and then I'm going to tell you that we have a station here that you can add other suggestions. So which one of those would you pick out of that group of 6 as being your preferred choice? Anybody still thinking about that? Well, let's take a look. Okay, Midway Commons looks like it's the highest support so far on that idea. So I know that we've covered a great deal of technical information. I appreciate you listening to us as we've tried to explain all of the things that have come about from the work over the last several months. The last part of the meeting, and from now on, and as long as you would like to stay, is a chance to provide more detailed discussion, get more questions answered, or provide more comments at the stations. And you'll see the stations are all around the back of the room. If you want to talk more about the strategic direction, if you want to look more closely or talk more about those place types, if you want to look at those design, form, and character policies, the mobility and connectivity policies, or the branding. Each one of those stations is around the room, and there'll be either a staff or consultant team person at each one of those to talk with you and get your comments. When you've finished providing your comments, you're free to leave, and I want to thank you for sharing your time this evening and for providing your comments. Thank you very much, and we'll talk further at the stations.